Hello, my gorgeous friends. I didn't say makeup loving because today we're doing a slightly different video. If you do, however, like this makeup look, I do have it filmed and it should already be up on my channel. But today I'm talking about sociopaths, psychopaths, narcissists, and antisocial personality disorder, all while smiling. I put this up on a makeup group that I am a member of. It's called The Sexy Sausages. We are Patreons for Make Me Up Missa, who is a complete and utter sweetheart. I actually got a lovely package of things from her today because she's far too sweet. But I kind of thought that this kind of is very much in line with my general videos because I have been doing a sort of an early series on my channel where it's an Ask Me Anything to a psychologist. I am planning on filming another one of those soon. I have quite a few questions that have been asked, so that will probably be up shortly after this one. And I'm also doing a makeup and murder. And when I'm talking about murderers and some of the atrocious things that they've done, sometimes the terms narcissist, psychopath, etc. are used, and the thing is, these terms can often be misunderstood. So I want to talk a little bit about that, and I also want to talk about some of the warning signs that you would see with a sociopath, psychopath, etc. So that if that is something you are interested in, then this is the video for you. If not, you know, still hang around, like just X out of the video, or don't X out of the video, just put me on silent. You would think that sociopaths and psychopaths aren't actually wildly prevalent, but the thing is, you are actually pretty darn likely to meet them. The current estimates are that sociopaths are making up about 4% of the population, while psychopaths take up about 1% of the population. Now, when we talk about sociopaths and psychopaths, they are both kind of put underneath the broad category of antisocial personality disorder. So actually, for psychologists, we don't really tend to use the term sociopath and psychopath anymore. It's put underneath the antisocial personality disorder umbrella term as part of the DSM, so the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual, that was put forward by the American Psychiatric Association back in 2013. So they have put that forward, but there are some different schools of thought in terms of sociopaths and psychopaths. So some people will say that psychopaths and sociopaths are the same thing because they show so many of the same characteristics. However, another school of thought is that actually they are different because psychopaths are born, i.e. there are genetic predispositions, there is a chemical imbalance, parts of the brain haven't been working, etc. While a sociopath is made by their environment. So it may be that they are brought up in abuse, that they have been bullied, that they have gone through very specific situations within their life to bring them to this particular point. Of course, the thing is, I would put like a little caveat there, because if something is genetic, it's pretty likely if somebody has psychopathy, then it's pretty likely that a parent has psychopathy. And then the thing is, that means that they're in a very particular type of environment. So that would actually also come into the nurture bit of like being made. So some psychopaths can have essentially backgrounds that are more sociopathic in nature, if that makes sense, hopefully. It comes back to the whole argument that we have in psychology on nature versus nurture. Are we born as we are, or are we essentially made? But if we look at psychopaths and sociopaths, we tend to see some common traits. So these are specifically conceitedness, deceitfulness, manipulation, and of course narcissism. So when we talk about narcissism, it's very, very important to remember that every psychopath and sociopath tends to be narcissistic, but not every narcissist is sociopathic or psychopathic. So that's actually quite important. So when we look at, for instance, a narcissist, that is somebody who may lack empathy. They have it, but they're lacking it in grand amounts. They can be grandiose, they can be entitled, they can constantly seek validation, they can be quite arrogant. Essentially, narcissism is a disorder of self-esteem. So they are using a lot of people in order to gain validation and have their self-esteem. But the difference between a narcissist and, say, a sociopath and a psychopath is that when a narcissist does something wrong, so when they do something that is morally incorrect or bad, they actually do feel shame and guilt, which a sociopath and a psychopath don't. Now, a narcissist will actually feel more shame than guilt because it's actually damaging their image of self more than anything else. So that's actually something really quite important to keep in mind. But when we are looking at sociopaths and psychopaths, like I said, they actually fall underneath the umbrella term of antisocial personality disorder. So in order to be diagnosed as having an antisocial personality disorder, the first thing is you have to be over the age of 18. The majority of psychologists won't actually diagnose you as having antisocial personality disorder if you are under the age of 18. That's something very, very important to note. But you have to show 3 of the following 7 symptoms, at least before the age of 18, and it has to be pretty darn consistent. So one of the first ones is that people with this diagnosis, they don't respect social norms or laws, so they may consistently break laws or overstep social boundaries. So this is, where we see sociopaths in terms of, they will rob a bank, or they will steal from somebody, or they will take advantage of somebody. This is where we see things like con artists, that they will manipulate somebody to get something that they want. This is not obviously part of our social norms. Our social norms would actually state we shouldn't manipulate each other to gain things. I think we can all agree on that. So that is one of the first things. The second very, very defining characteristic is that somebody with antisocial personality disorder tends to lie and deceive others. It can come out in lots of different ways. They can use false identities, aliases. They could lie about their qualifications. They could lie about their family circumstances. They could lie about things that are happening within their lives in order to gain things. That's the really important thing, that they will be doing these things for personal gain. So it may be partly that they're doing this for attention, but they could also be using that to gain things. So for instance, somebody with antisocial personality disorder may actually lie and say, I don't really have a lot of money and I'm finding it really hard to make ends meet. And of course, most people who have a lot of empathy will see that and kind of feel really bad for them and will reach out and try to help. And they may, for instance, give money, or they may give gifts. For instance, if they're saying, I really like this handbag, or, I'd love to buy this coat for myself, but I can't afford it because, bills, etc. They have essentially used these lies to manipulate somebody to get something for themselves. And that's actually quite important. It's the lying bit. Sometimes people will obviously say they don't have money. They genuinely don't. But this is a very specific example. Another characteristic, so we're on to characteristic number 3, is that people with antisocial personality disorder don't tend to make any long-term plans. And by that I mean that they will behave without thinking of their consequences. And this kind of comes back to lying. So they will engage in, for instance, a really, really long lie, and they won't think about, somebody could find out, somebody could figure out that this thing that I've said is happening isn't actually happening, and what am I going to do then? It's the same thing with a sociopath who might go and rob a bank or rob a shop. They aren't thinking about the long-term consequences of, I could get caught and I could get into a lot of trouble for this. Okay, so that's the third characteristic. The fourth one is that they will show aggravated or aggressive behaviour. This is really important. I think a lot of people forget what aggressive behaviour actually is. They will think that it's like overtly violent behaviour. When we talk about aggressive behaviour, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's somebody like slapping somebody or punching somebody. Aggressive behaviour can also be something that we call relational aggression. So it's the way that we can be quite aggressive towards each other within our personal relationships. So for example, If you looked at Mean Girls, Regina George engages in an awful lot of relational aggression. You know, they have their burn book. They're actually quite mean to an awful lot of other people. So, like, one of the ways that you could frame that is being quite bullying towards others. So, for example, being really cruel and excluding people, mocking people, etc. That's one particular aspect of that. The fifth one is that they don't consider their own safety or the safety of others, and that ties very much into not thinking about consequences. So when they are manipulating other people to get what they want, they aren't thinking about the long-term consequences for this other person who has actually very, very kindly given them something. They're not thinking of, well, they may be out of money, or they may be out of these particular resources that's going to make it a little bit more difficult for them to live within the future. So they're not thinking about that, right? The sixth one is they don't follow up on personal or professional responsibilities. So they, again, it's coming back to that repeated theme of just not thinking of consequences. And actually, interestingly, with people with antisocial personality disorder, we often see that they aren't able to hold down a job. They can often be quite late to work, or they can be really bad with their financial responsibility and not pay bills on time. So that's something that we can actually see. But probably, arguably, the biggest one, which is characteristic number 7, is that they don't feel guilt or remorse. So when they do something bad, this is again bringing us back to narcissists. Narcissists will actually feel bad. You know, they'll feel shame. But somebody with antisocial personality disorder, i.e. a sociopath or a psychopath, will not feel guilt or remorse. They won't feel any way bad about what they have done. They'll be inconvenienced. You know, they'll hate that you found them out. But at the end of the day, they don't really care. It's on to the next person. They will use you until you are tapped dry, essentially. And some other sort of symptoms that you can see in antisocial personality disorder, but they aren't actually like part of the core defining things. So the 7 things I talked about there, you have to demonstrate at least 3 of those to have a diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder. But the next symptoms are stuff that we just happen to often see with somebody with antisocial personality. So we could see that somebody is cold, so they may not show emotions or investment in the lives of others. So an example of that may be that somebody could be telling a story that is really emotionally wrought, you know, something terrible and traumatic that has happened in their lives. And somebody with antisocial personality disorder, excuse me, that's my laptop beeping. Somebody with antisocial personality disorder may show no emotion, or they may actually like laugh, you know. So that's something to actually really consider. Now, that's very, very different to somebody who has a social communication disorder, such as autism. They do feel empathy, and they do understand what people are going through, but they sometimes struggle with perspective taking. So that is completely different, completely different. So I really want to stress that. The next thing, of course, is using humor, intelligence, or charisma to manipulate other people, again, to gain what they want. Something that you will often see amongst people with antisocial personality disorder is that they have a great sense of superiority, that other people are only there to serve them and meet their eventual needs. They are just a means to an end, essentially. They also tend to not learn from their mistakes. So if they've been caught out, for example, for like lying, for example, they will engage in that behaviour again pretty darn quickly. They won't learn from that at all. They will just keep on doing the same thing again, over and over and over and over again. Again, this is part of why you will see that somebody with antisocial personality disorder isn't actually able to keep a job for that long. You will see they'll have very sporadic periods in and out of job. They won't last very long, and they also won't have very close friend ties because they will eventually burn those bridges. because again, they will just view people as being somebody that you can use to gain what you want. Another big, of course, factor is attempting to control others by intimidating them or by threatening them. That's something that we would see, you know, with people who are in, for example, drug gangs. A lot of people would say that people who are for instance, like drug lords, they may be more sociopaths than psychopaths, that they may not have necessarily been born that way, but they were brought up in a culture that basically reinforced that pattern of responding. So that is something to remember. And when we see that sort of thing, that's an antisocial personality disorder. Interestingly, the populations that we are more likely to see these symptoms in include things like CEOs, politicians, chefs, strangely enough, and even police. So these are people who are often in like very high-powered situations, a great sense of authority. We also have lawyers in there as well, whether we like it or not. But they do have that great sense of superiority and being able to essentially manipulate the environment to get what it is that they need. We, of course, can often see that somebody with antisocial personality disorder can get into legal trouble. So they will be the ones who are going in and out of jail or in and out of services, because again, they won't learn from their mistakes. They will take risks at the expense of themselves or others, because again, no idea in terms of consequences. A big one that we'll often see is that people with antisocial personality disorder will threaten suicide, or they will talk about suicide attempts, and that will be used as a means to manipulate other people, which is of course a very, very difficult one, because we have to obviously take any sort of suicide threat, suicidal ideation very, very, very seriously. It is not something that we can just say, oh, anyone who is saying this is somebody with antisocial personality disorder. That's not the case, but this is something that we do sometimes see within this population, and they will use that as an emotional manipulation to try and gain things from people, whether it's sympathy or whether it's things for personal gain. Like, I'm so sad and everything is so difficult for me, and then you may shower them with gifts to try and make them feel better. We will also generally see that this population is far more likely to be addicted to drugs and engage in alcohol misuse. That's partly, again, they just have no idea of consequences of their behaviour. So essentially, if we're to boil it down to sociopaths and psychopaths, if we looked at sociopaths, they have a really grandiose sense of self, and they generally feel really entitled to things. They are the sort of person that says, I see that thing that you have, I want it. They will be the sort of person that will come into your house and take a mental note of all of the things that they want to get off you, and they will use you to get that. That is what a sociopath is. And when they are confronted about that sort of behaviour, they won't think that there's anything wrong with that. They often, in fact, will try and turn the tables round and either try and make the confronting party feel guilty, or they will try and shift the blame onto somebody else and say, oh, that wasn't me that said that, or that wasn't me that did that, it was somebody else, and I'm actually only behaving in this way because this person said this or did this. So they're really quite cunning in that way. This sense of self-righteousness of like, I am entitled to all of these things, it tends to be supported by their superficial charm, and of course their incredible skills of manipulation. Like, they are so skilled at manipulating. They can also be quite domineering. They will be the person who will try and view themselves as being the leader, the head of the gang, the person who's in charge. That's what they will see themselves as. And they will consider other people to be instruments to get what they want, not as individuals in and of themselves. A sociopath, as I kind of alluded to before, they lie so often that it just becomes a part of who they are. They often, at times, can't even tell what's a lie and what's truth anymore, and it becomes very difficult to discern what exactly is going on. But like I said, they have a lot of difficulty in keeping and maintaining a friendship group, mostly because they'll end up exploiting them to gain things for their own personal gain. as I kind of alluded to, take a drink every time I say that, the current debate is whether or not there is a difference between sociopaths and psychopaths. So they will say, again, sociopath is made based upon the environment that they're in, whereas a psychopath is born. And they have looked at PET scans, so that's positron emission tomography, to look at the brains of psychopaths, and they have found that they have far less stimulation in the area of the brain that is responsible for empathy, and of course in the frontal lobe, which is responsible for basically forward thinking. They have far less activation there. But my argument on that is that actually the brain is quite plastic, in the sense that it's malleable. It can change over time, and if you use it or in a certain way, then certain neurotransmitters will be built, or they will basically degrade. If you look at the case of Jeannie, who was a girl who was basically left completely isolated for the first couple of years of her life, she had very little exposure to language, and as a result, actually the whole left part of her brain atrophied, and that's actually part of the brain that is responsible for language. So as a result, she could never actually learn language. But we also find that if you look at musicians, and they have engaged in thousands of hours of practice, the temporal lobe tends to be to have far more neurotransmitters and greater amount of grey matter than somebody who isn't a musician. And that's not because they were necessarily born that way, but it's because they have essentially, for want of a better way of putting it, they have exercised their brain to gain these things. So my argument on that is that looking at these particular things doesn't necessarily prove or disprove whether a sociopath is made or born, or a psychopath is made or born, because actually, you know, our brain can be impacted by the environment quite a bit. So, excuse me. An important thing to remember is when we talk about sociopaths and psychopaths who come underneath antisocial personality disorder, they don't actually go to therapy. They don't want to go to therapy. They don't see that there's anything wrong with them. The only reason they will go to therapy is if they are court ordered. And actually there's no evidence that therapy works for them at all. Like there's none. And actually what's interesting is if you put them into therapy, they are far more likely to learn the tricks of a psychologist and will actually learn to manipulate and twist the tables to make it seem like they are better. For instance, when I was talking about Edmund Kemper in a previous Makeup and Murder video, he convinced his psychiatrist when he was in for his first day for killing his grandparents, he convinced them that he was totally fine. That was down to him being in therapy for a long time. He knew what questions were being asked and he was able to manipulate it. Sociopaths and psychopaths are amazing actors. They can fake emotions really, really well. The term crocodile tears totally applies to them more than probably anybody else. Like psychopaths, sociopaths, and even narcissists, they are amazing chameleons. They can adapt and change to the situation. And you'll probably never really get to know their true self. They'll change the way that they're presenting themselves in order to get what they want. So they'll be very, very different with different groups of people because they know that they have to act in a certain way to get what they want. And of course, we all do that to a certain extent. We know that when we are with our professors, for example, in college, we're not going to go high-fiving them and asking them to go out drinking, but we might say that to our friends. But this is a completely different type of chameleon. This will be across people, and it's very difficult to know who they truly are. So again, they will always use people to get what they want. And once they have gotten what they want from you, they will discard you. So once they've figured out that well has run dry, they will find somebody else who is a flavour du jour. So you will feel like maybe they don't want to be your friend anymore, and that maybe, they found somebody else that they want to hang out with. Well, they're not really actually capable of having friends. It's that they have figured out that they have gotten all they could from you, and now they have to go and find somebody else to try and get what they want from them. If you have found yourself in the position that you are dating a sociopath, or are friends with a sociopath, I'm afraid it's not good news. You need to go, you need to run. If any of the things that I have talked about are warning signals that you see in a friend, in a family member, in a partner, that's not good. There is no way that they will change. They just won't, and they will use you until they get what they want, and then they'll go and find somebody else. So they will dispose of you once they've gotten what they want, or if you confront them, they could try and sabotage you. So even if you do point out that they have done something wrong, they will be the one who will be like, well, I'll badmouth you to everyone and say that you did this and you did that and you said this and you said that and you were a bully and you did that. That's what a sociopath will do. They will go around and, again, they will lie and they will say things to sabotage you. So my advice, if you have a friend, if you have a family member, if you have somebody that you're dating who's a sociopath, distance yourself. Get out of that ASAP. It is not a safe situation for you or for anybody that you care about. So sociopaths, they tend to be quite impulsive. Again, this comes back to not really thinking about the consequences of their actions. Whereas if you're looking at a psychopath, they tend to have greater sense of self-control. So if you're looking at, for example, the likes of Gary Ridgway, who was the Green River Killer, he was able to hold down a job for quite a period of time. He had quite a great amount of self-control. He was able to be married to his third wife for 16 years, all while going on a murderous rampage. Well, not quite a rampage, but he killed an estimate of 45 women. They were all prostitutes. But he was able to keep it under control to a certain extent. He didn't go around killing everyone, whereas sociopaths tend to be much more impulsive. So psychopaths can, of course, channel that into other things, not just murder. They can be a serial killer, but they could also be the CEO of a company and be very, very ruthless about the people that they are laying off. If we look at sociopaths versus psychopaths, sociopaths do have an ever so slight edge in terms of psychopaths, in terms of having meaningful relationships, because they can show some empathy for some people in their lives, but that's very, very limited. So again, if we go back to the likes of Gary Ridgway, he was apparently a very loving husband. So he would more fit the ideals of a sociopath in that sense. And this is why there's so much debate as to, are they necessarily different diagnostics? And I think that's why we've come up with the umbrella term of antisocial personality disorder, to try and kind of wade through all of that. So I think the important thing is to think about people with this disorder. They are incredibly manipulative. That is something that you really have to consider. They will look at you and they will figure out what it is that you want from a relationship. They're really good at targeting people. They will figure out essentially somebody who they know will probably give them what it is that they want. So, for example, Charles Manson was really, really good at that. He would say things to his followers like, I can be your father, I can be your brother. He brought them in as a family, the Manson family. And he took people who were essentially on the fringes of society and brought them in. And he gave them what it was that they were looking for. But he would also have this reciprocity where he would say things like, I'd die for you, would you die for me? So he was kind of getting that in there of like, you need to be able to do things for me. And somebody who is a sociopath or a psychopath, they will say things like that to you. If you are in pain, they will say, I wish I would take your place if I could. Would you take my place if you could? What would you do for me? Because I would do that for you. That's what a sociopath would say. Jim Jones, who was a huge cult leader. He had Jonestown down in South America. They, of course, had a mass suicide. They literally drank the Kool-Aid. That's where the phrase comes from. He actually had this phrase, he is quoted as saying, "If you see me as your friend, I'll be your friend. If you see me as your father, I'll be your father. If you see me as a god, I will be a god." This comes back to that individuals with this disorder are chameleons. They are. They will change themselves, they will change their behaviours in order to manipulate you to get what it is that they want. And that's essentially it. That's everything that I wanted to say in terms of antisocial personality disorder, sociopathy, psychopathy, and a little bit of narcissism thrown in for good measure. It's a little bit different to the videos I would normally do, because I'd normally like be chatting about this while putting on makeup, but I wanted to make sure I wasn't getting anything mixed up, or because this isn't usually my area of psychology. My area of psychology is actually in autism and behavioural psychology, so this is a little bit of a sidestep for me. It's a little bit different, but do let me know what you guys think. Did you find that useful? Have you seen that there are any sociopaths or psychopaths within your life? If so, you know my advice. But that is it. Do please like, comment and subscribe. It helps my tiny channel massively, because I am trying to get bigger, channel wise, not figure wise. You know, lockdown is difficult on us all. Do please share, because sharing is caring, unless of course it's an STD, in which case, you know, wrap it up, don't be gross. But that is it. That is the whole kit and caboodle. That is the whole video. I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.